Thank you for joining our OASIS Collaborative Automated Course of Action Operations webinar today. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and available after the event, and if time permits, the speakers will take questions at the end of the program. Please submit any questions using the Q&A option on your menu bar. With that, we have a great speaker lineup for you today, so I'll turn it over to Brett Jordan for introductions.
Thank you. My name is Brett Jordan, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Cacao Technical Committee and one of the original conveners of the work here at OASIS.
Hi, welcome to the webinar. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Cacao co-chair with Brett. And I wanted to give you a little background on Cacao. In 2017, a group of organizations formed from the US and Europe felt that we were collectively looking at the problems with cybersecurity playbooks. And we all felt that the organizations working individually and siloed really could do better by working together on creating a standard for cybersecurity playbooks. So that's what this standard was based on in 2017. In 2019, OASIS formed this technical community, and we're going to cover the standard today. Vas?
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everybody. From my side, I would also like to welcome you all and thank you for joining today. I'm Vasilios Mavroidis, and I'm the academic here. I'm a professor of cybersecurity at the University of Oslo, mainly conducting cybersecurity research in the intersection of cyber threat intelligence and automation. And I'm also the secretary and have contributed to Cacao, among other standards. So why Cacao? As we all know, playbooks have been used for decades in cybersecurity and incident response, mostly represented in human natural languages on paper or a wiki, and when shared, they are in the form of a blog post or a PDF. And as defenders, right, we must locate this knowledge on the World Wide Web, which is cumbersome, takes a lot of time and effort, and based on your organization and security structure, you would need to transpose those documents found online into something unique and meaningful, your incident response plans, right? But still a pain point today is that also our systems and teams are siloed and isolated, something that Cacao has accounted for and will be discussed later on. Also, even nowadays, right, playbooks are not machine readable, meaning they cannot be executed by machines and perform any response process at machine speed. However, though I want to be accurate, right, and honest, there are workflow approaches that are machine readable, but either they are not tailored to the needs, right, and peculiarities that the cyber domain has, or are proprietary based, mostly hidden within SOAR platforms, security orchestration, automation, and response platforms, making them not shareable basically. And then we as defenders cannot exchange them and benefit from each other's knowledge like we do already very well with standards and approaches for cyber threat intelligence like STIX and TAXI. Lastly, at least from my side, as defenders, there is a pressing need to connect playbooks with cyber threat intelligence and have a more intelligence-driven approach to cyber response. Think of it, right? For example, for a specific ransomware campaign, you would like to be able to exchange with your trusted group quality playbooks that can really respond fast and with precision to this threat. So what is Cacao? Cacao is a standard developed by the Cacao Technical Committee of OASIS. It focuses on interoperability and provides you with a common schema for creating security playbooks. Fully vendor agnostic, right, and technology agnostic. And basically, we did what STIX and TAXI did for cyber threat intelligence.
Yeah, Vasilios, I think that's a really great point. These playbooks have been around forever. People are operating on them, but things are slow. Incident response is manual and painful, and it just takes a really long time to do anything. And then also to know what you should be doing in your organization based on a given threat. And like you said, you need to be able to tie this back to threat intelligence through, STIX and TAXI. And ultimately, we need to be able to respond in an automated way and respond in cyber relevant time. And so when we look at the process today, these diagrams may be familiar to many. Sometimes they're just words and paragraphs, and as Vasilios said, a lot of times they're on a blog post or you're on an internal wiki. but it's really difficult and challenging sometimes to figure out like what you need to do, who's going to operate on what. And then when you're trying to do this through an automation mechanism or try to incorporate multiple teams inside your organization, it becomes really challenging to build a workflow to be able to do handoffs and be able to say, okay, I've done my part. Now let's hand it off to the server admin team, or let's hand it off to the mobile team, or let's hand it off, to the connected device team. And all of these teams have to work together, and the communication process is challenging and it's very difficult. And so this is where we're at today. And this is one of the reasons why we looked at Cacao, and we were looking at threat intelligence and looking at the way threat actors and campaigns and, malware stuff was being documented, and then trying to answer the question, therefore, now what? And so we wanted to take a look at this problem space, as Alan mentioned at the start of the webinar, and try to figure out how could we make a meaningful impact in cyber relevant time to help defenders be able to share and be able to collaborate and do things with, either prevention or detection or mitigation or remediation response.
Yeah, and I think, Brett's highlighting a fundamental issue that many organizations face different types of threats, but a lot of the security controls that they have and how they respond to that is reused for different types of attacks, but fundamentally the building blocks are the same. And so being able to define and reuse those building blocks in modular ways, extensible ways, in those playbooks is a key thing that we wanted to capture in Cacao. And a key thing was that we also didn't want to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of commands and tools out there that are very useful, are extremely prevalent in the industry, and we wanted to build upon them rather than redefine them. So what we focused on when we were defining the requirements for Cacao was, how do we embed those capabilities and connect them together with the control logic or the orchestration of the operation to respond to an attack or do an investigation or respond to an incident in a manner that leverages those existing tools very effectively. So we looked at a variety of organizations and capabilities that were already making some advances in this area. We looked at how, for example, STIX defined threat intelligence. We looked at IACD, and we also looked at BPMN and how it structured playbooks for IT operations, etc. And then we encompassed that into a JSON-based schema for Cacao. And ultimately, we want to drive that towards connecting it with STIX and Taxi. I know, Vas, you mentioned that earlier. Do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, we already mentioned the importance of coupling Cacao playbooks with cyber threat intelligence for faster and more effective response to threats, right? And I think we will explain this mechanism later on this presentation. But what is important to know is that Cacao was developed with the intention of interconnected with STIX, right? So as you will see, they have similar design principles and other commonalities. And basically, STIX is great for supporting detection engineering and providing you with context, whereas Cacao provides you with information on how to respond to a threat.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is an example of a playbook that Cacao has designed. Vas, do you want to describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I say, a real playbook, right? It was developed in the context of a European project, Phoenix 2. And, it was created based on conducting risk assessments and business continuity assessments on specific utility in the EU that operates in the energy sector. And the intent was basically to identify if we can use Cacao, because Cacao is a horizontal standard, but we wanted to see if we can really apply Cacao in different sectors and address, basically account for the peculiarities that they may have. So this is an example playbook that basically is, we call it generic playbook. It's not related to a particular threat, but is focused on specific attack type, in particular false data injection. in advanced metering infrastructure. And on the top left, you can see that an advanced metering infrastructure basically is an interconnected system of smart meters where data about the energy consumption is forwarded, something that is called heightened, where there you can actually see what is consumed. Basically, you can forecast the energy consumption, perform billing, etc. This playbook in particular, well, Cacao is encoded in JSON, and this playbook, as you can see, is like graphically represented. This has been developed by an open source tool that we sponsor and maintain basically under the OCA umbrella, the OASIS Open Cybersecurity Alliance umbrella. Its name is Cacao Roster, and this playbook basically depicts generic mitigation, remediation, and business continuity strategy for false data injection. That we detect false data injection, and what happens basically is that this playbook starts forwarding notifications to different entities. At the end of the playbook, we have the reporting phase, which basically also sends a full report to national security authorities, because we have a specific reporting requirements here in the EU under NIS2. Overall, basically, it contains the affected systems and brings back other safe systems for business continuity. So, the business and the operation of the organization is not going to be interrupted.
Yeah, this shows a very comprehensive example of how Cacao can embody many different aspects of the systems that it needs to. Let's take a step back for a second and look at the fundamental building blocks for Cacao. We focused on the key requirements for organizations, both to define playbooks, but also potentially sharing them with other organizations, whether that's inside their own internal organization or externally. So one of the first things that we focused on was what metadata helps describe the playbook. And we'll get into that in a second to go into more detail what we mean by metadata. The second part of the key element of a playbook is the workflow of the logic. And that's effectively defining the control of flow and what sequencing and parallel steps, etc., need to exist for this particular workflow. And we'll get into the details of how you construct that in Cacao. And then the final part is really taking that logic and that control and flow and applying it to specific control elements in your infrastructure, whether that's human beings that may be executing a manual step or a machine, a firewall, etc., and what those firewalls or systems are doing against specific targets. So those were the three kind of key elements of Cacao: metadata, workflow, and agents and targets. And we'll get into a little more detail as we go through the presentation. Brett?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So one of the things I think I want to make really clear is we wanted to make sure when we were designing Cacao that it could work in operational environments that work today in a very manual way, but it could also be a bridge to fully automated playbooks in the future. And so when we go through these various parts of the metadata and the workflow steps and the agents and targets, you should be able to see that you could use Cacao today in any of your manual type incident response mechanisms. And you could also do some of them partially automated, and then you could also do them fully automated. And one of the key things that we learned, as Alan and I and Vasilios, worked on STIX, and I helped co-chair and was lead editor on that for a long time, we learned about the importance of metadata. And then as we looked at playbooks and looked at how they would be operationalized at scale and be incorporated into the ISACs and ISAOs, and certs so they could be distributed, we understood that there was going to be a lot of things that would be needed. And so we looked to STIX, because we worked on that, and identified the various key things that would be needed to help in that graph. So as was previously mentioned, there is this intersection between Cacao playbooks and STIX threat intelligence, and it can all fit inside the same graph, and it can all fit together with the relationship structure that exists. And so some of the features that we inherited just completely and exactly the same from STIX was like how do we build identifiers, and how do we do versioning, and how do we do labeling and data marking, and how do we build external references? And all of those things are these core concepts that we brought into Cacao to make it so that people that implement Cacao, make it really easy for them, especially if they've already implemented parts of STIX or they're already doing things with threat intelligence. Next slide. And so the other thing that we realized really early on is, unlike STIX in some ways, you're going to have these operational, course of action objects, these playbooks, and they can be used for all sorts of different things. They can be used for detection, prevention, mitigation, remediation. They can also be used for investigation, or they could be used for awareness, or they could be used for attack simulation. And so we needed to define these playbook types that kind of correspond to the operational roles that the playbook supports. And in addition to this, we needed to be able to understand some of the playbook activities that these could be tied to, so that when you have a lot of them, you're able to search more effectively and be able to categorize them and be able to get responses back. So you could say, we're seeing this type of threat actor activity, or we're seeing this campaign, we see this intrusion set or this piece of malware in our organization. But to be able to search at scale for playbooks that could mitigate, remediate, or prevent that based upon what it is you're trying to do. Some organizations are using playbooks for early warning and detection mechanisms across large geographical spaces. And to be able to say, okay, we're seeing a new type of threat, and here are some things that you need to look out for. You can do all of this in Cacao, and then you can tag it with the correct type of playbook type and the correct type of activity, to make it so people can understand what the playbook is about without actually having to read it and parse it. We want to get into a situation where humans don't have to read JSON data to figure things out, or like today, read through an entire blog post to try to figure out, is this thing going to actually help? And so this is why we created some of these metadata concepts, with playbook types and playbook activities, is so that you can quickly understand. And even if you had like an AI engine on top of your SOAR tool that was running Cacao, it could recommend things to you that could potentially help solve your problems. And then one of the last pieces of metadata that we added, and we added really early on because we learned this lesson from STIX, is not every implementation of Cacao is going to be able to process everything automatically. And so we needed a way to identify the logic and the various constructs that are used inside of a playbook, especially the more advanced ones, and be able to give a hint to the program or the SOAR tool that is processing this, or even like a distribution mechanism like an ISAC, ISAO, or SERP, to be able to identify what is the core logic pieces that are in there. Like, does this make use of switch statements or parallel processing, or does this have, extensions or data markings? And so that a SOAR tool that's ingesting these doesn't have to parse the entire playbook to try to figure out if there's something in there that it doesn't know what to do with. It can look at this little bit of metadata and be able to quickly identify, oh, I can operationalize, 3/4 of this playbook automatically, but there's a certain part that I'm going to have to bubble up to a human because my code logic doesn't support, this functionality. And so we wanted to make it really easy for vendors and manufacturers and companies that are going to be implementing Cacao to be able to process these playbooks and be able to do something with them, and then also know when there's something in there that they don't support.
Yeah, I want to complement this key part of the metadata is that when we talk about playbooks, some may think that it's this huge monolithic definition of everything that takes place. We deliberately designed Cacao to be modular, and just like as you program functions and modules and then construct larger, more complex programs from those modules and functions, you can do that with Cacao as well. So if you want to have a playbook that's focused on a small task, such as investigating a specific type of data in a log file, or looking up scanning a system, for example, you can define that playbook. And then you can combine that playbook into more complex playbooks that are encompassing both investigation and mitigation, etc. So we built Cacao very similar to how programs are constructed, and therefore having that metadata summarize the more complex playbooks is really important. So workflows are really where we start to define the logic of the workflow in a playbook. And the key thing that we learned from BPNN was that how they structured their playbooks was they defined the steps, the actions separately from how those steps were connected together in the logic flow. And we felt that that was a nice paradigm to follow. We defined it using JSON and Cacao, but the key thing was that it's a very similar design approach to what BPNN did. So what operators can do is they can say, I have this action, I have this control flow step, such as an if statement or a switch or while. And then what I can do is I can actually connect the logic together into the program. So I can have an if statement that breaks into either a switch statement or a while statement, and you can then start to sequence all of the actions together. This is a very natural approach to how programmers program scripts or languages like C++, etc. But the key thing here is that it's following the logic of applying the incident response, etc. We can do sequential, simple sequences. We can do parallel steps. We can do conditional loops, etc. Brad or Vas, do you have any additional comments on this?
I would like to, go ahead first, Brett.
Yeah, so one of the things that we also added was this, idea that you need to be able to do process management and time management. So you need to be able to either start at specific times, or you need to wait, or you need to have some sort of delayed start, or you need to be able to do some sort of notification, get the CISO out of bed. And it's because, everyone in the technical committee has a lot of experience in operational environments, and we've worked with, the paper playbooks for decades. We understand that, there's sometimes when you can't take, a major system offline, like right in the middle of the day, even if you do have to do like an update or you have to do some sort of processing, there are things that need to take place before that can happen. Or sometimes you need to wait for a change management window or something like that. So you can encode all of that logic into a playbook, into these workflow steps, as Alan was saying, and be able to make use of it based upon the conditions that exist inside your organization. And we didn't want to be prescriptive and try to mandate how things are going to work, because every network is different. And I know years and years ago, when I was running very large networks, we always used to joke that Cisco had a view of how every network should be built, but every network is actually its own living, breathing organism, and everybody that's working in it kind of works in a slightly different way. And so we wanted to make sure that the workflow steps could be adapted to however your organization works, but they're all based on these key building blocks that you can reuse and partition inside of the workflow however you need. And Vaz, you had some comments here?
Yeah, I just want to add that based on these features and the flexibility of Cacao, at the end of the day, reading a technical specification, is not the easiest thing to do, and start writing a playbook in JSON. So that was the motivating factor that we create also the Cacao roster, right? So now you can go in Open Cybersecurity Alliance and find the Cacao roster, and basically you can generate your playbooks by using a graphical user interface. It just implements a drag and drop approach, right? Where you add different constructs with different semantics to a canvas. And the roster basically allows you to not only generate playbooks, but you can modify them, digitally sign them, verify them. And we have also incorporated a coordinates mechanism that allows you to keep the layout of the playbooks consistent across implementations. We also have a live instance, so if any of you is interested to start experimenting with Cacao and design playbooks, just search online OCA Cacao roster, and it will be the first result.
Yeah, and just to follow up with Vasilios there on the rooster, like it is a wonderful tool. And it's a great way for people to start playing with and experimenting with. We know that there's a couple other products that are being released. One was released today from TNO out of Europe. And there's a couple other companies that are releasing products, and it's really nice to see Cacao being used and then having these wonderful tools like the one that Vasilios and his coworker Mateus built, the Cacao Rooster, so you can actually build the playbooks and play with them and see how they all work. So one of the things that we also realized early on is this need for these concepts of agents and targets. Agents are the entity or the thing that is actually going to execute the command against some sort of target. And depending on how complicated the organization is or how simple it is, these agents and targets can accommodate all of those needs. So at the extreme end, we wanted to be able to work in an operational environment where you have one or two IT people and that's it. And everything is done manually. And then the same person is going to, be the person that executes it, and he's, he or she is going to do whatever they need to do. And so you don't need to create a whole bunch of structure in order to work in these very simplistic environments. But in turn, if you do have a very large and complicated environment, these agents and targets can be used and expanded based upon those operational needs. And especially if you have different organizational units that are going to be doing different parts, you maybe have different business units and different teams inside those business units. We wanted to make sure that all of these concepts would work well. And in addition, you can do things like attack simulation. So not only can you work on the operational defense side, but you could also use Cacao playbooks for the red team, purple team pen testing side, so that you can document the things that you're going to do and how you're going to run these commands. And so these agents and targets really took the technical committee, a good couple years to really figure out and really kind of work through kind of what is the semantics around them, what is needed, what is not. How do we make sure that we can accommodate the really simple manual use case that is done today in small organizations, but yet also work in the more complicated, large institutional, organizations, and without creating burden on both sides. And so I think, Alan, you really worked on a lot of these pieces. Maybe you have some additional thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you captured it well, but ultimately, we just wanted to highlight, ultimately the definition of an agent can be, as you say, it can be a human being, it can be an organization even, or it can be a specific system such as a firewall, a web server address. Ultimately, how you construct the workflow is the action says, I want to update this agent with this command and pass arguments known as targets. So if, for example, you wanted to block a particular IP address on a firewall, the agent would be the firewall, the command would be the block command, and then the target would be the specific IP address you want to block or potentially allow. The key reason why we broke it into this structure was so that you can reuse these elements for different attacks or different threats. So the agent would be the firewall, it would be defined once. The command, block, or allow would be defined once, and then the targets would be specific to a particular event, a specific incident. The key thing here being that ultimately, if you want to then apply this very simple flow you see on the screen into a control logic where you're looping through every single firewall in your organization or a specific subset, you can build that loop, back to the earlier slide where you can have a while loop, go through all firewalls, updating them with, the block command for a specific target. So we thought logically about how to break those things into simple definitions and then be able to then loop it in. The commands themselves can be anything that you want. They could be a manual command. So if you're passing something to a human being, where you have no automation and you need the human being to act, you can provide a description. If you want it to be a shell command, if you want it to be an HTTP web command, OpenC2, etc. The commands that Cacao support are extensive, and we deliberately intended to not be restrictive. So if you have a system or a new system that comes on board that you would like to use Cacao with, you can extend it in a very natural and easy way. With that background, let me pass it back to Brett on some of the philosophy about that extensibility that we designed in.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And one thing that I realize that we haven't mentioned yet that is really important is Cacao supports this concept of variables. So in all of the workflow steps, in all of the agents and targets, and all of the authentication pieces, they can take in a variable which you can define, outside of the playbook and pass into the playbook, or you can define in the top level metadata of the playbook. So that you don't have to hard code things, especially if you don't know exactly what needs to be done. So like if you're going to be building these playbooks for, the entire organization or a sector, or you're going to be sharing them inside a trust group, you can define, that you should be updating all of your firewalls and just leave that as a variable that the end organization can then pass in to list out all of their firewalls that they want to do. And as Alan said, you could do a while loop and loop through and go through and touch all of your firewalls or touch all of your endpoints, or, all of those sort of things. And so a couple of the other key features that we focused on was this ability to continuously evolve based upon the ecosystem and be able to define these objects so they can be building blocks and be used for other things. In Cacao, we realized that we weren't going to be able to figure everything out in these initial releases, and that we needed to enable the industry to be able to grow and adapt and to be able to publish extensions. And so we defined an extension mechanism in Cacao. And then since, the three of us have also worked heavily in STIX, we took that extension mechanism over to STIX, and then that became part of the STIX specification as well. So it's the same extension mechanism, and it's now used for both Cacao and for STIX. But this allows people and organizations to create, extensions and then be able to publish them and make them usable and shareable across the ecosystem. Another thing that Alan and I worked on really early on, long before the technical committee got started, was we knew that there was going to be a need for trust in the ecosystem. No organization is going to pick up an automated playbook and run it without some sort of trust. And so we needed a way to be able to digitally sign these JSON objects. And anybody that's worked with JSON data knows that the normal ways of doing this are really only designed between two systems, between like an end user and an authentication system, and thus they're authentication tokens, or, JSON web signatures, or JWTs, and that specification came out of the IETF. But we knew that these objects needed to be able to be shared across an ecosystem, and that they weren't going to be validated just during transit or just when it was consumed, but they may need to be verified and validated at a much later time. Auditors may come along and need to verify things. And you also needed to be able to countersign and have multiple organizations be able to sign a playbook. So you can think about this that, in our hypothetical example, that there's a large vendor that produces firewalls, and they've, realized there's a new intrusion set, Fuzzy Panda, and they want to be able to block that, intrusion set activity. So they come up with a command, they build it in Cacao, they can digitally sign that. And then maybe an ISAC is going to pair that with a bunch of other things, and then they're going to holistically sign all of that And then it may go into an organization that has multiple business units, and that organization is going to do the validation and they're going to digitally sign it as well. So then once it gets down to the operational users, they can see this chain of digital signatures that this, vendor that produced the firewall signed it, the vendor that produced the operating system for all the computers signed it, the ISAC has signed it, their trust group has signed it, the main business unit has signed it. And so there can be this level of trust. But that concept and technology didn't exist. It wasn't available for JSON data. And so one of the things we did is we worked on a mechanism, a scheme to be able to do this. And then we took it to the ITUT and got it standardized as an X.dot number. So it's part of the X.500 series. So X.500, X.509, which you're probably all very familiar with, all come from the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, which is a division of the UN. And we took this playbook signature concept, this JSON signing concept, and we took it to and we got it supported or ratified at the ITU, and now Cacao supports this. And so Cacao has the ability to digitally sign all of the playbooks that people are going to use. It's very simple, very easy. And as Vasilios mentioned, the Cacao Rooster already supports this functionality. So you can play around with building a playbook and you can digitally sign it. And you can also go through and verify the signatures. And so you can create something, you can share it across your ecosystem, and then other people can look at it and they can validate it and verify it. And so these are some of the core features that we really focused on from the very, very beginning. And, we understood that this is where we were going, and these were the things we needed to do. We needed to be able to incorporate with STIX. We needed to be able to have extensions. We needed to be able to digitally sign. And that really influenced our design methodology for the specification as we went through. So.
I'll take over. So basically, as we said, Cacao was designed to plug into the STIX graph. For those of you that are not familiar with what STIX is another standard, another machine-readable standard that focuses on cyber threat intelligence, basically the context around adversaries, and it's quite awesome in supporting encoding, detection engineering, but also contextual information. But when it's about response to threats and incidents, STIX 2.1 has the course of action basically not really fleshed out. So it has a description there that will allow you to encode something, right? Perform this or perform that. But we designed Cacao actually to address this limitation there, to be able to include a playbook in a machine-readable format that can actually result in automated course of action. On the left side of the figure, I try to bring a conceptual STIX graph to see how it looks like. So you have in the mid course of action object that is actually extended, and I'll explain in a second how. But basically, this object has a relationship with other objects, and if you have a vulnerability in your infrastructure, by having the right course of action, right, and the ability to detect that something is wrong, so you can actually mitigate or remediate this vulnerability. Using a Cacao playbook, you can fully actually automate this process. Of course, if certain preconditions are fulfilled. In the middle of the slide, you can see basically the approach, right? So Brett already mentioned that in Cacao, we created an extension mechanism that is now utilized also in STIX. And we do actually the same thing there. We are extending STIX, and in particular, the course of action object. And we just basically append a set of properties to incorporate security playbooks. The mechanism is basically proprietary, format agnostic. So what I'm trying to say is you can, incorporate Cacao playbooks, but you can use it actually with any other kind of playbook that you may have an exchange. So it uses the exact same mechanism to extend the course of action object and append Cacao playbooks. On the right side, you can see an example of it. This is a bundle, basically. I mean, it includes a series of objects, but for the sake of space, I could only add, the course of action object that incorporates an extension. This extension basically brings the semantics and tells you, right, what are the new features, what are the new properties within an object. in this particular use case, the course of action object. And then, of course, there is a JSON schema, which is the normative definition, basically, of the extension that you can verify that this object is correct. So basically, this course of action object incorporates an automated workflow. At least in our case, we're able to fully automate this one. That after detecting a specific vulnerability, we are checking how many systems have been infected in our infrastructure, and then actually we have other playbooks that we can patch these systems if patches are available, or specific mitigation actions.
So we'd like to know if there's any questions that anyone has from this webinar and from what we've talked about. Obviously, if you have anything, we can try to address it now. And if not, you can always reach out to any one of us or to OASIS directly, and we can try and get you a response after the webinar.
No, this is great. Thank you to all of our speakers. We do have 2 questions for the group, and so I'll tell you what the question is, and you can tell me who wants to answer it. What are the 3 key things Cacao will help with? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I can start and let my co-authors and speakers share their thoughts. I think, as we mentioned, one of the key things that we wanted to address was the fact that organizations really needed a standard that they could share with other organizations and embody the knowledge that they had for their threat response or their incident response, and be able to share it in a standard way that then is either executable in other organizations directly, or at least informs how those other organizations should respond to the same threat to their environment. There was no such way to communicate that, as we've mentioned several times. People writing a blog post or writing a white paper, that is not machine executable. Cacao has really taken those elements and standardized and created a machine readable form of the playbook, and more importantly, the knowledge that goes into that playbook, so that everybody can benefit from it. Brett, Vas, do you have others?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, we kind of talked on or touched on earlier was being able to operate at scale and operate in some sort of cyber relevant time. Normal incident response today is very challenging. It takes a long time just to identify that there has been an incident and then identify the characteristics of the incident. Obviously, threat intelligence begins to help with a lot of that. But then the mitigation remediation process is very challenging. Like, you have to go out and do research and figure out how are you going to solve this and what are the steps you need to do. And then, is this blog post, correct, or is this complete, or is it trusted? And we need to get to a situation where as soon as a threat gets identified and threat intelligence gets created and shared, that playbooks can get shared as well with, how do you solve this? And then right now, there's going to be a lot of people that will still operate, post Big Bang, where you're going to be operating after the attack and trying to do the cleanup. But hopefully longer term, we can get to a point where most of these playbooks are preventative. And so as soon as somebody sees an issue, they can say, okay, here's a playbook to clean it up, but here's also a playbook to prevent it in the first place. And so that's, some of the key things that I think, would really help.
That's
I
great.
have a last comment, because there is always a misconception, right? That even though that we developed Cacao, right, to be able to create interoperable workflows for full automation, Cacao can be used by organizations that don't have automation capability, right? And this goes back to the rich set of metadata that we have. So you could go online, use the roster, you can start creating your standard operating procedures or tailored playbooks based on the threats that are relevant to you, right? These metadata they are so flexible and so so expressive that allows you to create like a knowledge base of playbooks. You can have a knowledge management system. You can start filtering these playbooks based on sector, based on threats, based on the actions that they perform. So I just want to make evident, right, that I always like saying the words automate as you go, and you can really start from zero. But having a process is better than having nothing.
Great, thank you. Another question would be, how widely supported, say by vendors, is Cacao?
So I can take that initially, and then maybe Alan, you can, and Vasilis, you can comment. I know of several vendors that are working on deploying this. There are tools that are coming out, open source tools. As Vasilios mentioned, his team created the Rooster. There's a company in Europe that just released today a SOAR tool that fully supports Cacao. I know of a couple other SOAR tools that have implementations of Cacao, whether they're in production or they're still just in development, but I've seen them and they're working. But like with STIX, it obviously takes a little bit of time for the ISACs and ISAOs to begin to sharing this and then vendors to begin to adopt it. But I do know that there are, several that are, available and some that are in process. Vasilios, Alan, do you have any other insight into that?
Just want to say that Cacao is relevant, right, for any big vendor. So, and basically, we can see that many vendors that provide SOAR solutions, are part of this technical committee. If they are not sometimes contributing directly to the specification, they are always following the specification, and that's for a reason. They understand that this is the future.
Agree, and I think both of your answers are very comprehensive, so I don't think I need to add anything.
Okay, we have one more. So is there an effort regarding automation of the actions and connecting the playbooks to a source system or workflow automation framework, something like the Hive or Cortex?
So there has been some work, as I just mentioned. There's some systems that are trying to use Cacao natively in their system, and then some that already have a well-defined taxonomy and data model, and they're just building conversions between them. So it's following the same vein that threat intelligence went. You had a lot of tips or threat intelligence provider tools that had their own internal data model, and then as they go to share it with the ecosystem and the trust groups, they would just do a translation into STIX and then send it out. And then when they got stuff in, they would consume it. And so a lot of vendors are looking to do the same sort of thing, that they will use Cacao as the sharing mechanism. And then, they will translate it into their internal data structure or data format. So.
And if it is to go back to the open source community, as Brett mentioned, we already have a roster that allows you to graphically represent playbooks and generate playbooks. But you also mentioned, Brett, that today TNO, a research institute in the Netherlands, basically published an open source tool, Soarca. It's an orchestrator for Cacao, and we are already in communication with them to combine our roster and their orchestrator, because our roster does not have an orchestrator, and the orchestrator does not have a graphical user interface to assist with the generation of playbooks. So that's our next steps.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Does anyone from the speaker list want to just say a few words about what's next for Cacao?
Yeah, so I think, I can start, and then Alan, maybe you can take, and maybe Vasilis, you can finish this up. But I think what's next is getting awareness and adoption going, maintaining the specification and the standard, and then getting feedback from the industry, if they need additional things. And some of those may be done as extensions. Some of them may be put into future versions of the spec. But the spec is pretty stable, and the text is very stable. And we've done a lot of experimentation and playing around with, building playbooks. I know there's organizations that are looking at building and publishing playbooks. There is a group that has looked at a lot of the IAACD work that came out of Johns Hopkins APL, which we talked about earlier in the deck. And they're taking those playbooks and converting them all into Cacao and publishing them. And so I think you're going to start to see, the various ISACs, ISALs, and certs be able to, start hosting and making available these Cacao playbooks. And so really right now, like the specification is very stable. We did a 1.0 release, we did a 1.1, and now we've done a 2.0 release. And it's going to be, getting feedback from industry and seeing how things go.
Yeah, and just to add to Brett, I think the fact that we're on version 2.0 already it does show that we've added a lot of capabilities to the specification. I know that there's been some feedback on additional interfacing with OpenC2 and how it for system would interface. So that's something that the TC is going to look at and how to standardize that. Ultimately, the key thing with Cacao is to make it super easy for people to extend it and then incorporate those extensions for new systems or new command systems into the Cacao standards so that everybody can benefit it. And that's the whole point of why we created the extensibility capability, but also want to leverage it going forward.
Well, and if I can just follow that up, Alan, one of the extensions that we're working on right now is the ability to define how this playbook is going to look on paper for people that want to lay it out on paper. And this work is actually being driven by the University of Oslo, by Vasilios and his team. And this is going through the process, and will eventually become a committee specification. But it can allow you to not only do the automation side and everything that you would need to do to operationalize the playbook, but it also gives you the ability to define the layout so you could actually print a pretty picture. So if you wanted to turn around and hand this to a CISO or a CIO, or be able to, have a library of these that you're going to, have, upper level management or executives be able to understand what's going on, you're going to be able to do that as well. And we've heard that there's a couple other extensions that people want to do. And as these get rolled out, they will get, made as an extension. And then eventually, the really good ones that are really useful will get rolled into the standard. And just one other key point, on the industry feedback, some of the metadata that we talked about in these abilities, like that Alan was just mentioning, to be able to search and be able to categorize and be able to understand what these are, these came from vendor feedback. And the metadata stuff, some of it came from DHS as they're looking at deploying Cacao into their AIS system that would run, along with their threat intelligence feeds. And they needed this ability. And so these things came into Cacao and they got worked on and got put in. So DHS and MITRE brought those concepts in and worked on them, and we got those put into the spec. So
yeah, I mean that's a very important point. We wanted to drive into the standard requirements and needs from companies that were doing this on a day-to-day basis. We didn't want to just come up with some way that we thought was cool and wasn't proven by practical experience. So Cacao embodies all of the knowledge and experience of all of the technical committee participants that work from all these companies, and we try to characterize it in that standard. And I think the version 2.0 is really good example of that.
Terrific. On behalf of OASIS, I'd like to thank both our attendees and speakers. And I wanted to mention a follow-up note will be sent out to everyone that includes the link to the recording. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.